like to welcome here among us Mr. Fredrik Löfqvist and from the Swedish Embassy. Welcome, and I would like to invite you to say a few words for the start. Yes, please. Yeah.
So I'm very happy to be here in Ljubljana tonight, and I'm also very happy to see such a fantastic and lively festival of literature, Fabula, and a very prominent Swedish author, Perom Enquistom, has been invited here. Perom Enquistom is a very good representative of Sweden. Having said that, I don't want in any way to reduce his writing or his art to national stereotypes or coming from a special culture or nation. What I mean is that when you read you will learn a lot about Sweden. You will find a lot of Sweden in his writing. And I've heard him twice get the question whether he considers himself to be a European author. I will not answer that, but it's very obvious that the themes he writes about are European, including the one in the book that will be presented tonight. But the way he does it is, I think, very typical Swedish. It's a concentration of language. It's a mistrust of facades. Perom always tries to go behind the facade and tries to find out what has really happened. And he does this in a very experimental fashion, also in this book. And in latest books, he also tries to go behind the facade of himself to find out who he is really behind the facade. And I think this mistrust of the facades, of what seems to be, and trying to find out the deeper truth behind, in a way to demystify, to de-glorify, is a very typical Swedish trait. With short sentences, very, very concentrated language, you will find that what has really happened and what is really going on is something totally different from what you believe from the beginning. Perhaps in the beginning in a much more prosaic way, in a little bit less glorified way than it seems, but then the real mystery starts in this very strong concentration. I will not say something more than that. I'm very happy also that the Embassy of Sweden has been in a very modest way, but still that we have been able to contribute to this evening happening. So with this, I will give over the floor to
Thank you very much, Mr. Löfqvist, for these very kind words, and thank you for your support. It is extremely precious for us. Now, before we start, perhaps I would love to say we'll make only a very brief introduction for those of the listeners tonight who are not really acquainted with your work. In Slovenia, there have been published only 2 books of Perom Olovom Enquistom. A couple of years ago, Captain Nemo's Library, Knjižnica kapitana Nema, in translation of Sara Grbović, and now, in the framework of the Fabula festival, the book of Blanche and Marie, translated by Mita Gostinčić-Pahor. These 2 books are very different in many ways. First one tells a story which is deeply rooted in Sweden, a story about 2 children which are being exchanged by accident in the hospital, and then 6 years later they're being returned to their original families, and you can imagine what this causes. The second book, we'll talk later much more about it, is a book about love. It's a universal metaphor of love through science, through a specific also period of time. It's the end of the 19th century in Paris. So these two books are set in very different locations, as are many of Perom Olovom Enquist's books. He has written, I think, 13 novels, if I'm not mistaken. Even more.
I never counted, but I think it's if you just mention novels, it's round about 13 years.
13 theater plays, children's books. Two in one. Perhaps that's a theme for later on. There is also, I haven't read that one, but I was told that there is also the story of a bear. And you perhaps, I don't know if you don't know, but in Slovenia we are quite familiar with bears, and there is also a family relationship between the bear you described and Slovenian bears. So.
Now, maybe, I think the Swedish bear is a bit bigger, of course. There was at least the one who...
Bruno.
Oh, yes. Well, I give up.
Yeah. Librettos for a libretto for opera I found out today, and essays,
yes.
And many articles in newspapers, etc. You wrote also as a journalist, but to come back perhaps to a start. Högböle, the place you grew up, the small village in north of Sweden, produced 5 writers, 5 members of the Swedish Writers Union.
Yeah, everyone is very surprised. This is a small peasant village with about 80 people living there.
Yeah.
At that time, I'm born 1934, so I'm 76, very old. I've been writing for 50 years. I did my first novel in 1961, exactly 50 years. Now, well, this is a very small village, peasant village, deep in the forest, 1,000 kilometers north of Stockholm, close to the polar circle. And everyone has asked later, how come that so many of these 80 people are writers? And we are not related to each other. It's not the same family. It's not that. And it's very difficult to understand it. I don't even know the right answer. It can be the intensive religious surroundings, the deep religious, almost fundamentalistic religion that I've been raised into. We don't have anything else to do than to be deeply religious or writers. I mean, we don't have any cinema, no theater, we are not allowed to play cards, absolutely no alcohol, no sport, and so on. And it's so deep in the forest that there's a lot of inbreed. People are marrying each other in the same family, and so it comes out a lot of village idiots and writers, and you know.
So this is a story I think we here in Slovenia can relate very easily to. Yes, it doesn't seem like that.
The majority is writers or idiots.
Yes, and there is a lot of inbreed as well.
I feel at home here.
No, I was struck actually reading the first chapters of your book that is almost autobiography, and Under this Leben.
It is an autobiography.
Yes, but it's also at the same time a novel. It's a novel about a third person which lived almost your life.
I would say that it can be regarded. When I finished it, I thought I was looking on that strange person in the novel, coming from a little village, peasant village up in northern Sweden, and having a rather successful career, and then at the 80s falling into deep alcoholism. And I try to answer, which I'm out of now, so don't be afraid. Since 20 years, I wanted to write a story about a young European young writer that everything was doing. He was doing so well, and suddenly everything went wrong. And this is a story that is, in the end, I thought this is a novel. There's no fiction in it. I've written the story as honest as I can about me myself. And I had a lot of writing in the third person. He, Perom Olovom Enquistom. That made me more, having a more distance to him. It made it be more easy to be sharp against him, to tell the truth, the mistakes he did, and so on. So sometimes I think it's a memoir, sometimes I think it's a novel, almost documentary novel about myself. Today I say it's a book. It's a book. It's a book. It's a big fat book about biography.
But isn't that, I mean, isn't that something truly specific to your work? I mean, many of your novels are really based on basic facts, but then, of course, there are being these facts. Facts basically work as a vehicle for the story, but it's not only plain facts.
Well, sometimes people say that I mostly write documentary novels. That is not true. Captain's library is about my family, about the tragedy in my family. Two tragedies in my family. And it was very difficult to write, and I couldn't have written it if not my mother has just died. Because things can be said and things cannot be said sometimes. I have written one pure documentary novel, and that is, it's called Legionnaires, and came 1968, about a sad story in the politics in Sweden. That is the expedition of Baltic refugees from Sweden to Soviet Union, 1946. 146 soldiers that was sent away to Soviet the winter 45-46. And it has always been a trauma in Swedish politics, the Baltic Lenin, the Baltic expedition on the walls. And everyone has been speaking about it all the time, saying that was something really a tragedy, and they were all killed, and so on and so on. But the interesting things when I started as a very young, I was 30 when I started it, and took me 4 years to write, with a lot of interviews from England to the Soviet Union. I mean, it's a tough way to try to find out the truth if you're going to make interviews in the Soviet Union in the 60s about what happened with these people in Gulag, or if they were not in Gulag, or trying to find out people were they executed. And everyone said to me in Sweden, you are naive if you can find out the truth. And I said, well, in that case, I am trying, at least. No one has tried before. And that is a documentary novel, and I think today, when all the archives are open, and no Berlin Wall, and no Iron Curtain, and I've been there in the Baltic, especially in the Latvia, many times since when it's all open. I think that is absolutely what I've written at that time is now confirmed the truth. That is, I was so to speak, I was knocked out, attracted by the fact that we didn't know exactly Everyone was talking about the story and no one could say exactly what happened. And it's true that I have written, for example, a play about Strindberg and a TV series, by the way. And about Knut Hamsun, the movie. If you look on these and about Samuel three writers, and if you look on the writers, the monuments, you get fascinated by them because you can look on the monument and they are fantastic and you know exactly how they are. But if you look close enough, you can see there are some little bones, some little hole in the monument. You can find things that are not so nice or even nicer than the monuments, and you can make them more human.
Would you say, perhaps, that basically writing documentary novels is a great impossibility, because as much as one proceeds in gathering documents, laying one facade after another, the truth escapes? It becomes more and more fictional?
No, absolutely not. I think if you collect more and more, for example, I wrote a novel about the creator of the Pentecostal movement, who happened to be a Swede, Levi Petrus. And in the beginning of it, I wrote it in the 1990s. In the beginning, he was regarded one really black, terribly conservative, terrible man. And the more I looked at him, what he did, what he wrote, what he preached, and so on, I thought, yeah, he's a really nice guy. It's not so bad. I know exactly it is the same political, but not that totally black and white. And then you get attractive, and suddenly in the end, he is a bit like me, myself. A little peasant boy coming from poor circumstances and making something astonishing.
What was striking to me,
and I will answer you the question. I have realized, and I realized that if you collect material about something, then you choose. And you can make almost whatever you want of this material. You can pick the pieces together, and it can be a lie, and it can be a truth. It depends on your conscious. I prefer to find something that creates something that is more of a truth than before. But I realize that it's a human being that's making the choices. I make the choices. Some other people maybe have done, should have done a totally different collection of truth.
When is a book, in your eyes, completed? When it creates a kind of truth?
Oh, it's very good. I go by instinct myself. I think when I have a feeling that's as much as I can do. That is the maximum I can do. I cannot rewrite and rewrite. I am a rewriter. If I have rewritten it too many times, then I say, Jesus Christ, this is problem. I give up. And I think there is a moment when I feel it. That's what I can do.
If you would continue and you would overlook this moment, would it be bad for the text, bad for you, bad for both? If you would, you wouldn't take care of this moment, which says to you, now I can't do more. Is it?
Well,
or is it only a hypothetical question I'm posing?
Well, it's an interesting question. I feel scared when I say, sometimes I don't reread my books, but sometimes I read them England and say, you could have done that better. Especially from the beginning, I wrote two really bad books when I first made, and they were so cute. And I was desperately happy and proud of these two books. And please, never read them. The third one was really good.
The third one, that was the book that you wrote as a student in studying, I mean, having Lars Gustafsson as your roommate, or was it later?
I've written about that in that latest book about Lars Gustafsson, the Swedish writer, that some of you may know him well. We were living room to room together in 1955, one year. And we had a very funny view on ourselves. I regarded him as some sort of strange madman or philosophical genius. I mean, I couldn't decide, and he regarded me as a high jumper. Period.
Lars Gustafsson is known here. He was visiting also Slovenia a couple of years ago, as did Thomas Tranströmer, who you also quite often mention, especially one sentence. I've written it down. I mean, I found it's a very nice quote. I have to find it now. You've been playing music together, didn't you?
No,
no,
I'm sorry, I'm not, I don't have it. I was playing clarinet when I was younger, but I didn't.
No, but there is this number I would love to. I have to ask you about. I guess everywhere you go, they ask you the same thing. I cannot resist not asking you the same thing.
What is it?
1.97. What does it mean to you?
That is the personal record in high jumping, which I did in 1957. And today, when I'm 76, I am a bit proud of it because it was the year, many years before the flop, it was a sort of primitive style. But sometimes I think that it seems that I'm the only high jumping writer that I know. If you say goalie, for example, in football, they say, oh, Camille, Nabokov. There's a lot of goalies in football that are writers. But I think I'm the only writer.
Probably right, but you did start high jumping and writing basically in the same period of your life. And how did it go this together?
I took it as a sort of retreat. I tried to be one of the best high jumpers in the world. And I came to the level I was pretty sure on 195, 196, 197. But in one competition, I think it was in the end, last year in the 50s, I was number 4 of the Swedish championship. And in the sport magazine, sport paper, the day after, it was, the analysis was, best of the rest was pre-win. It hurt me so much. So I started rethinking, because I was writing at that time, I hadn't published, but I said, you must choose something that is more easy, and I was choosing prose.
Which is stunning to me. Perhaps you know this book by Haruki Murakami, All That You Wanted to Know About Running and Marathon. And he likes marathon. And to me, somehow, writing novels and a marathon go very well together. But high jumping, that's probably more closer to poetry.
Yes, totally misunderstood the noble art of high jump. Because when you see the high jumper is a lonely man.
Yes.
He's training with himself. He's not training in team. He has no team collection. He's doing the training, the weights and everything alone. And when he's competing, he has 6.5 seconds from start to catastrophe and success. So he's extremely concentrated. And by the way, being goalie in football is the same.
It hurts more.
I'm hurt, deeply hurt. But there is something I learned from, or something that is in common with the loneliness of the high jumper, and that is total concentration and focus on what you're doing. And when you're sitting and writing a novel, and it takes you 3 or 4 or 5 years, and there is just one thing that is important: not the children, not the wives, not the friends, not total concentration. And maybe I learned something from this life as a failing high jumper.
Would you describe then writing also as in these Beckettish terms as a constant failing, but always failing badly?
Was it Beckett?
Yeah, it was Beckett.
Well, he started so well and it was slowly falling down. No, I didn't have a feeling. When I think I know where. After you finish the book, you are, it's sort of divorce, and you are giving away the book, and you love it, and you see it on a little distance. I also been doing theater, theater plays. I did 13 maybe, theater plays, and that's totally different. A novel, that's really your child. You have total control of every comma, everything, and you are responsible for it. And that makes the noble art of novels something fantastic and something very different from everything. Theater, you write a play and then someone else is taking it over, and there's a director and he is maybe changing things. And there are actors, and there are actors coming and asking me, what did you mean with that? And if I say, I mean that, would then say, wonderful, thank you. Then I go to the director and he says to him, hello, shit, I told you you have misunderstood. I was speaking to P.U. and he said, this is the way it should be done. And then the play totally collapses. But I've learned better to be just to shut up. I think I wrote in that book an image about there are horses who do racing horses that can be very nervous. And when they are nervous, the trainer is taking a little rabbit, a little white rabbit, and put it in his spilta. And the nervous horse is getting, what is that, little friend? Boom, boom, boom. And they fall in love, and the horse is getting calmer and calmer, and he never hurts the little rabbit. And that is, and so he goes out and is a winning horse again. And the role of the rabbit is exactly the role of the playwright if they send him into a production theater. If he just sit down and say, wonderful, they all will be calm and go on, and you know. I'm a little white rabbit.
Have you always been in the productions Little White Rabbit? Or?
Yes, I learned. Sometimes in the beginning I was the one who was telling the truth, which is a catastrophe. And I learned. Now I'm the rabbit. And I learned something more. I also directed myself on theatre. I directed my own plays, and I also directed Strindberg's Monsieur, for example, and I did it for a couple of plays for TV, which is fascinating.
But directing your own plays, that means being both horse and rabbit.
Now the horse are the actors.
Okay.
Mostly. Yeah, I know, but if you direct yourself your own place, you have a sort of authority taken into the production and well, it's the difficult thing is, or the good thing is, if you direct and you are the writer yourself, you can sometimes choose your friends. The friends you have, the actor friends, and I have a lot of actors now that. So it's going to be a nicer production if I choose my enemies.
I suggest perhaps it's time to listen to some excerpt of from your book that came out recently, book about Blanche and Marie. If this is possible, first to hear it in Swedish, and then Mr. Janez Starina will read the Slovenian translation.
Yes, my friend here has chosen some parts of it, and first I read in 30 seconds or 1 minute, so you can hear the tone of the wonderful Swedish language, which is not so difficult. If you, for example, I know you are brilliant in German, and that is it's very easy for you to learn Swedish. You can.
One can understand quite a lot reading, but listening is much harder.
That's true. That's true. Now, the part here. Axel Munthe har i boken om samma kille berättat hur han en gång bevittnade en seans på Salpêtrière-sjukhuset i Paris. En föreställning i stor lokal med kanske överdrivet. Det vanliga var ett rum som kunde ta 30-tal åskådare. Han vill kanske förstora sin upplevelse av det han kallade hypnotism. Förstadiet till Charcots hysterieexperiment med Blanche. Han har sett Blanche. Han nämner henne dock aldrig vid namn. Det är bra. Det är fint. Han besudlar henne inte med sin närvaro. Dr. Munthe är full av förakt. Citat. Den stora aulan var fylld till sista plats av en mångskiftande publik ditlockad från hela Paris. Författare, journalister, berömda aktörer och aktriser, fashionabla TV-månder. Alla sjukligt nyfikna på att bevittna hypnotismens verkliga fenomen. Somliga av försöksobjekten var utan tvekan influerade av äkta suggestioner som ingivits dem under sömn som en posthypnotisk suggestion. Flera av dem var bedragerskor som visste vad man väntade sig av dem. Somliga luktade med förtjusning på en flaska ammoniak. De har sagt att det var under kolont. Andra åt ett stycke träkål med det lättaste som choklad. En annan kröp på alla fyra på golvet, ursynt själva när det var sagt till henne att hon var flaxande med armarna som för att försöka flyga när de skulle föreställa en duva. Lyfte på kjolarna med ett rop av förskräckelse när det sugererades henne att en handske som kastas på golvet var en år. En annan gick och baggade ömt i en hög hatt i armarna och man sa till henne att det var hennes barn. Hypnotiserade till höger och vänster dussintals gånger om dagen av doktorer och studenter tillbringade många av dessa flickor sina dagar i en slags halvtrans, med hjärnan förvirrade av de orimligaste solutioner, endast halvt medvetna och säkerligen inte ansvariga för sina handlingar, dömda att förr eller senare sluta i Sardes världsliv, om inte i dårhuset. Jag känner igen det.
Aksel Munthe je v svojem romanu Knjiga o San Micheleju opisal, kako je nekoč prisostvoval en izmed seans v Sant'Effilia. Predstava se je odvijala v velikem prostoru. Morda je malce pretiraval, običajno je bil to prostor, ki je lahko sprejel približno 30 gledalcev. Mogoče je s tem želel okrepiti svoje izkušnje tistega, kar je imenoval hipnotizem, predstopnjo Šarkotovega poskusa na Doroš. Videl jo je. Nikjer je ni omenil zemljino. To je dobro, to je lepo. Ni je umazal svojo prisotnostjo. Doktor Munthe je poln prezira. Velika avla je bila do zadnjega kotička polna raznovrstnih gledalcev iz vsega Pariza. Pisatelji, novinarji, znani igralci in igralke, elegantne mimontke, vsi so bili bolestno radovedni in so želeli biti priče nenavadnim pojavom hipnotizma. Nekateri predmeti poskusov, torej ženske, so bili nedvomno pod vplivom pristnih sugestij, ki so jih dobili med spancem s posthipnotično sugestijo. Druge so bile sleparke, ki so vedele, kaj se od njih pričakuje. Nekatere so z navdušenjem povohale stekleničko z amonijakom, ko so jim rekli, da je v njej kolonska voda. Druge so pojedle kos oglja, ko so jim ga ponudili kot čokolado. Neka ženska se je postavila na vse štiri in začela pesno vajati, ko so ji rekli, da je pes. Z rokami je krilila, kot bi hotela vzleteti, ko naj bi predstavljala golova. Dvignila krilo in prestrašeno zaupila, ko so ji sugerirali, da je rokavica, ki leži na tleh, kača. Druga je v rokah nežno pestovala klobuk, ko so ji rekli, da je to njen otrok. Hipnotizirane vse vprek, po 10-krat na dan, od zdravnikov in študentov, je veliko teh deklet preživljalo dneve v nekakšnem koloričnem transu, z možgani, ki so bili zmedeni od skrajno neprimernih sugestij. Bila so pri delni zavesti in gotovo niso bila odgovorna za svoja dejanja, prej ali slej pa so bila obsojena na sadež na žit ali celo na norišnico. Prepoznam se v tem. Ko sem bil otrok, govoril kot otrok in imel otročje misli, torej, ko sem bil star 16 let, sem obiskal predstavo, ki jo je imel neki mojster sugestije, neki hipnotizer. Bilo je v dvorani v Skelefstroju. Gledalcev je bilo približno 70. Vsi smo plačali vstopnino, 3 krone. Bil sem sramežljiv, zato nisem šel rad na oder kot nekdo iz publike, a sem se iz radovednosti opogumil. Na odru sem stal prvič. Ne, da ne bo nesporazumel, nisem bil sprejet v ogromno bolnišnico v Parizu. Nisem se nahajal med elegantnimi nevimontkami, znanimi igralci ali požrešnimi intelektualnimi opazovalci, ne. To je bila le šolska dvorana v Skelefstroju. Na odru nas je stalo menda 6. Hipnotizer je bil mož v svojih 50-ih. Potil se je. Vse, kar je Aksel Munthe opisal v knjigi o San Micheleju, je bilo tudi tukaj. Morda ni bilo tako uspešno ali dramatično, a amaterski hipnotizer in potujoči sugestionist, ali se to tako reče, se je trudil. In boleče jasno se spominjam, kako sem si kasneje dopovedoval, da sem vse to naredil njemu na ljubo, ker se je tako močno potil, da bi uvražil njegov strah, da bi premagal strah, ki ga je on prenesel name. Ker je bilo občinstvo tam spodaj sovražna množica, ki bi se lahko v trenutku obrnila proti njemu, če bi mu spodletelo, odgovornost bi bila pa moja. To me je nenadoma prešinilo. Proti temu dvomljivemu potujočemu umetniku sugestije bi se množica obrnila s posmehom ali nezadovoljstvom kot nasilna, nevarna, od razuma vodena žival, krvi željna masa, ki bi lahko šla v vsakem trenutku v napad. Razumel sem, da smo zato mi tam zgoraj v svetli mrzli električni luči, zaradi katere se je tako potil, a predvsem se je potil od strahu, da smo skupaj odgovorni in da smo zato izkazali pripravljenost k umetniškemu sodelovanju. In da imamo nalogo, ki jo moramo izpeljati pred sovražno, nezaupljivo množico, ki bi se v primeru našega neuspeha mogoče spravila na nas z bučnim roganjem ali prohodom. Mi, umetniki, proti živalski ljudski množici. In zavedal sem se, da moramo skupaj opraviti to strašljivo in grozljivo nalogo. Kasneje nisem nikoli več stal na odru, a sem vendarle vedno stal tam. Občutek pripadnosti pri zapeljevanju množice je edino, česar se spominjam. Všeč mi je bil. Preden sem vstopil na oder, je bil možakar zaničevanja vreden šarlatan, a ko sem bil zgoraj, mi je prevzelo sočutje in njegov strah pred sovražno človeško živaljo. To je bilo moje kratko bivanje v Salpetrieru, bolnišnici, ki se je nahajala na odru šolske dvorane v Skeleftoju, kjer sem plačal 3 krone za vstopnino, pa še sodeloval pri predstavi.
The book of Blanche and Marie has already 2 of the 3 main female protagonists in its title. Marie Curie, need to say a lot, much more about her, but perhaps about the other 2, Jeanne Avril. Just now in this cultural center there is an exhibition of Toulouse-Lautrec, which is a very nice coincidence in my eyes. Jeanne Avril was one of the ladies who were portraited by Toulouse-Lautrec, and especially then Blanche Lucknow, who was for several years in the hospital, Salpetriere. We've heard just about it in this excerpt, and who later became the assistant of Marie Curie. Basically, this book is, at least I read it as a great investigation about the theme of love. What is love? And it's being told basically from the perspective of Blanche, already at a very late stage, where she is basically living in a small wooden wagon. Her feet have been cut away, basically. Her left arm, she has only the right arm to write. Why? Because of radiation, etc. So there are these 3 notebooks she writes, the notebooks of questions, the yellow, black and red one, where she basically tries to investigate her life, her relationships with the other 2 women. And there's this perspective of the author browsing through these notebooks, making quotations out of them very often, trying to be critical also to them in order to create a very complex picture of what was going on in the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th. Now, when I ended reading the book, the first question was, where are these notebooks? And of course, later when I made my research, I could see definitely the burden they are imagined. But the way how you combine them, the way how you play with so-called quotations, true facts, is creates this ambiguity about which we were speaking in the beginning. What is truth? What is fiction?
Well, taking these three women, Joanna Britt, for example, I discovered she wrote a memoir in the 30s, 1932, that are not, because she was so famous and on the posters and so on. And that is rather, it's not a brilliant book, but it's extremely interesting. And there is one chapter when she describes her years of Salpêtrière exactly in the custody of Charcot. And there is a hint in the end of that chapter in her memoir that is saying that in some way she developed her dancing after being treated by Charcot when these attacks and violent. And she saw some connection between what happened in Salpêtrière and the Charcot. I was very surprised. I could never imagine that she had been there, but she has not been there, and she's playing an interesting role. Now let's take the other one. Marie Curie, we all know about her. We know there was been written everything from her daughters, Marie Curie, which for a long time was, so to speak, Bible about Marie Curie's life. And it's an interesting book, but she has made some interesting jumps over some facts. And one of the facts that she doesn't mention, she mentioned in one sentence, but very much covered, so to speak, is that Marie Curie had a love story with a good colleague who was married with 4 children and become passionately in love with him and trying to take him from his happy marriage, which wasn't so happy. And for Swedes, that is interesting is that she got 2 Nobel Prizes. And when she got the second Nobel Prize, there was exploding a scandal in the French papers. Paul Laurent's wife, who was very jealous, has discovered a letter from Marie to Paul Laurent. And this is a very nasty letter. She said that you never allow her to come into your bed. You must be mean to her, so she was, maybe she is pressing you out of that, and be as mean as you can, and so on, and so on. It's a very sick, it's a very sick letter written by a woman who is desperate in love. It's not written by a scientist who has developed fantastic things, not by a rationalist. It's from a woman in love that just want to kill, to tell the truth. Now, this letter was published in, which is a very long letter. I just take extracts from it. It was published in French papers. A French paper, and recorded again. And that was 2 weeks after the Academy, Scientific Academy, Academy for Science in Stockholm has rewarded her with the second Nobel Prize. And the rumor came to Stockholm that it was a scandal, and those were days, scandals. That was even a big scandal. And the president of the Academy wrote a letter to Marie saying, we heard about it, that if there is any truth in it, you must write a letter saying that you don't want to accept the Nobel Prize. and don't come to, in that case it's true, don't come to Stockholm. And all these correspondences are published in book form. Marie was thinking sharply and went to Stockholm, took the prize from his hand, the Majesty of the King, was the center of these celebrations, went back, and I think no one in Sweden knew anything about that. Now, that is part of this love story. The love story from a woman that is desperate much, and she's desperate in love. Blanche Whitman, who I the first time I met the name was when I was writing on a dissertation in the 60s in Uppsala, history about Strindberg and Freud, and the connection between Freud dream play and Strindberg's dream book and Strindberg's dream play. If there is anyone, I didn't find anyone, by the way.
You did?
No. Lars Whitman is one of the most, was at that time one of the most observed women in the 1880s and 1890s. Those people, you can see it on the cover here, it's a famous painting with Charcot and Lars Whitman. And there was on the Thursday shows showing that attacks of hysteria. He was pressing some points here and then, and that before had some epileptic attacks, and after 1 hour she could be taken back to senses again by pressing other points and so on. It was Charcot who has developed some idea after Mesmer, who I also wrote a book about the physical winter of the recognition, and that was the talk of the town, really. And you can find how many witnesses as you want about Lars Whitman. Now, the problem is that she never wrote one word in her life. And you are absolutely true that these 3 notebooks doesn't exist. But I try to find out as much as possible about her background. And I've been reading all the observers that saw her. But you can from that mouth, she never spoke one word as I know. But I wanted to give her a voice, and I wanted to give her words, and wanted her to tell a story. So you have one extremely well-researched woman, Marie Curie, and you have Lars Whitman, and we know that Lars Whitman in the 1 year in the beginning of the 20th century was the assistant of Marie Curie. So they met in reality, but we never know what Lars was saying, and we know a lot about Marie Curie. And they are telling each other something about love. And that's the meaning of the novel. I'm trying to say something about the absurd love, which is, I think, in a very bad image, something like radio, interesting but dangerous, could kill you. Am I right?
You posed a question, and the book that Blanche writes in your novel is a book full of questions. I think there are a couple of times there you repeat the sentence that basically we can't say anything about love, but it would be a waste of everything if we won't. No, I'm paraphrasing. Pose questions.
vilka borde vi om ni inte försökte you can never say anything but men vilka borde, but who were we if we didn't try something?
Yeah.
You're right.
How was this book received? I mean, because to me it's an extremely striking book because it really plays with reality. It plays with persons who are not compared to other books of yours, or compared to the library of Captain Nemo, who are well known, who are superstars in the world of science, but and where there is basically nothing one could object about. I mean, besides there is this really layer of story that makes their lives transparent and translucent in a different way.
Well, I don't know exactly what was the question, but the fascinating for a storyteller, the fascinating for a novelist is of course not Marie Curie, because you can write an historic novel about her and the love between and Pogovor and tragedy and so on. But that could be, so to speak, documented. But the interesting is, of course, the open, silent mouth Lars Whitman. And Lars Whitman is the factor that makes it fascinating for me as a writer to try to say something else than raw facts. Is that an answer?
No, it is. I mean, it is. To me, this relationship between raw facts and what is imagined, this is very striking, and basically where one leads into another. You know, the big metaphor of the book is science. Radium, radioactivity. This leads to an extremely poetic picture of something that radiates and that can kill at the same time, that humiliates basically and makes the personalities of the novel basically die in a tragic way. Blanche ends up only with a torso, with one hand.
Yeah, I'm trying to avoid these types of metaphor or images that can be too easily interpreted, too easily made an interpretation of it. But it's striking when you look on the way they were looking on radio at that time. They produced it. I mean, the oil for radium oil for the skin, it makes your skin beautiful, yes, and it created cancer also. But they didn't know anything about these two sides of radium, but sometimes I feel it's like Mesmer, the man who in the 18th century tried to cure human beings who were ill by a magnet. He had some ideas that he was putting magnets on the fluid inside the human body. It can be. He was trying to find out something, and Charcot, that who was a genius as a neurologist. Then he tried to do something else and tried to develop it again, and in some way he failed. He was very successful in other fields. And at the same time his secretary Sigmund Freud that tried to look into human beings' inner world. this is not like muscles and nerves. It's something strange inside human beings that we must examine it. And Freud did something fantastically good and very bad, and now he's a little bit, he's not so en vogue, or whatever we say. But they tried all the time, tried to reach into human beings. What is a human being? It must be something else than bones and muscles. And they fail, but I have a sort of respect for them, even Charcot.
There could it be read the way you describe fictional relationship between Blanche, or opinion of Blanche about Freud as a criticism?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, this disease à la mode, they call it hysteria. What the hell is that? Maybe these women had some sexual relation, maybe their husbands were bad lovers, maybe they had a bad economy, maybe they wanted to have a job and was staying at home, maybe they couldn't get a child. I mean, it can be interpretation in how many ways and so on. And of course it's striking that this mountain of hysterical women in Salpêtrière in the 1880s, suddenly almost every French woman was had hysterical attacks. What was that? No one knows. Otherwise, that we know that there are many answers for it. Maybe 6,000 answers.
I mean, it was clear also in the process of medicalization of the modern world, I think. I mean,
Yeah.
Foucault writes a lot about it.
Yes, yes.
Before the end of the novel, there is the following sentence. She recognized it's a sentence about Blanche. She recognized that a man, a human being, shouldn't search for this that exists, but for this what should exist. I read it also as a perhaps sentence that could be applied to each creative activity. But if it is so, then my question would be, what is then the force behind this creation? Is it ethical force? Is it fear? Is it what is the writer's drive?
Well, I can just. I was thinking of your question about these 3 notebooks that I sometimes quote, giving her. What should have happened if I found these 3 notebooks? I should have written a book, and it should have been a competent historical dissertation. But I was lucky enough not to find these 3 notebooks, so I had to create a love story that is possible, but not based on facts totally, but is that, so to speak, blank projection, what do you call it? Sheet, and which for me makes it much more exciting to find what is possible, not only what has happened. I can write about what has happened and what was the possibility in what was happening. Yeah, it's the same. I think that everyone who's reading a crime story doesn't want to know from the beginning what has happened and so on. They try to find out and be as smart as possible so they can see, I know what's going on, and then failing, and okay. And in some way, you are looking into history the same way as a sort of a detective or a little bit square-headed detective who find out more and more layers, more and more, and failing and going to a blind alley, and it's something very exciting. If you don't, especially if you don't find the solution from the beginning, and even if you are a bit insecure in the end that you have found a total reality, a total Wahrheit, truth. So I don't know. It's just very exciting.
I think that's the most beautiful possible end of this evening. Thank you very much for coming and sharing your literature with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.